back to Globalogs. This is going to be our sixth installment on the ongoing Venezuela narrative. There it is, up in its little narrative box. And today we're going to talk about the economic troubles that Venezuela finds itself in now, and how this has affected governance, and how this has affected choices that Maduro and his administration have made, and bring us pretty much up to the present, but before we start talking about, implications of all of this and where it might go in the future. So, to be quite blunt, Maduro inherited a pretty bad economic situation in Venezuela that has gotten only worse. Venezuela's primary product, as we have talked about before, and as I devoted an entire episode to, is oil. But the dependence on oil over the course of Chavez's time in office intensified significantly, from about 77% of exports before to 96% of exports at the time Maduro took over. And more than this, it accounts for half the fiscal revenue of the government. And as a consequence of this, the just sort of general public finances of the entire country are enormously dependent on the price of oil, and that price has not fared well. The oil price topped out at about $150 a barrel in the summer of 2008, while Chavez was still around. Now, while it cratered a few months later with the sort of global financial collapse, it then recovered to about $100 a barrel and stayed there for a while. But even this is not enough for the Venezuelan government to maintain all of its economic promises to its population, many of which predate Hugo Chavez, but many more of which were put in place by him as part of his broader 21st century socialism that we talked about back in episode 3. The Venezuelan government requires something closer to $160, $170 a barrel price for oil, which it never had, in order to balance its books, and things have gotten only worse and only worse. Its outstanding government debt is becoming hard to service, and strains on taxes from lower tax revenue for the government are making things worse than that. Imports, which obviously have to be paid for in foreign currency, because that's what the countries that export require, U.S. dollars especially, are becoming scarcer and harder to come by. Some of these are inputs for things produced locally, and there are regular shortages now of basic goods like washing detergent, like toilet paper, and in fact many of the kinds of protests that we talked about last time that are making political trouble are themselves economic protests. Where are my basic household goods? People have to line up for hours in order to get things that in much of the rest of the world, even much of the rest of the developing world, are really sort of considered just basic things, soap and milk. And all of this, of course, dreadfully exacerbates the sort of basic security problems that Venezuela is facing that we also talked about last episode. Maduro has made some international efforts to try and shore up Venezuelan finances, especially through sales of oil and promises of oil for many years to come, especially with China, which was a strategy that had been pioneered by Chavez, both as sort of market diversification and also as a little bit of, thumbing the nose at the Monroe Doctrine and the United States. But, again, like I said, also sort of market diversification. The Chinese continue to put money into Venezuela. Just earlier this year, in I believe it was July, an additional loan of $5 billion was promised to help keep Venezuela afloat, but it's sort of a bit perplexing how the Chinese think that they might be able to extricate themselves from this, as this is really not an issue of liquidity, the Venezuelan government just not having enough cash on hand to meet its current obligations, but really a problem of insolvency, that there is simply no way under its current setup of public finances and its current economic structure that it would ever be able to generate enough money to pay this all back. Of course, the Chinese, I presume, are expecting that they'll be paid in oil, but, as previous Venezuelan regimes under Chavez had nationalized some assets, it's certainly not out of the question that some future Venezuelan president might try to nationalize assets that had been promised to China. Venezuela now has some of the worst inflation in the world, by some measures getting into the triple digits. Bolivars, as seen there in that sort of, cartoonish representation, have now been made, significantly closer to worthless than they had been previously. All of this, as I said, just exacerbates crime, makes it harder to resolve things, and many people, including the opposition, might just be waiting for things really to hit an absolute rock bottom before they try to rebuild from there. Of course, other countries, especially Zimbabwe, dealt with even much worse hyperinflation, and then finally from their cratered out position started climbing back up and are not in quite such a parlous state right now. But the Venezuelan economic situation is bad, really bad, and not about to get better anytime in the immediate future, even if oil prices climbed back up to $100 a barrel and stayed there for a year or more, because, as I said, even that is not enough to pay the bills. And so the sort of dire political situation that we talked about last time, coupled with the even more dire economic situation that's currently unfolding, puts Venezuela in this situation now where it's sort of felt that the center can't hold any longer. Something's going to give, and whether that's give in direction of more Maduro and more concentration of power in the presidency under the way things are now, or some sort of reversion to the way things were before, it's not known. But it's to those questions that we will begin to turn our attention next episode. Thanks a lot. See you then. Bye-bye.